So we got the Washington Post to print a correction about us in the last 24 hours, and as I frame this correction and put it on our infamous wall of shame, I'm reminded of all of the corrections and retractions that journalists have done in reporting about Project Veritas over the last few years. Over the years, journalists have printed hundreds of corrections and retractions in their reporting about Project Veritas, and the irony is they're printing these corrections and retractions in articles about how I have supposedly lied or made something up. Very ironic. Famous examples: Carol Leonnig, Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter for the Washington Post. She won a Pulitzer Prize. She wrote in 2009, O'Keefe said he targeted Acorn for the same reasons that the political right does. Its massive voter registration drives that turn out poor African Americans and Latinos against Republicans. Leonnig was forced to retract that entire thing. I never mentioned African Americans voting when she interviewed me. She said in her retraction, quote, "The maker of the videos, James O'Keefe, did not specifically mention them." Yeah, that's right, Carol, I didn't mention them, but you made it up. You just made the whole thing up, and that's why people think the Pulitzer Prizes are a joke, because you people can get away with stuff like that. We would never do that, what you did. Another example, Paul Farhi of the Washington Post, also of the Washington Post, you're starting to detect a pattern here, aren't you, who reported that we omitted that John Bonifield, the CNN producer, who said that the Russia story was bullshit and for ratings, Farhi claimed we omitted the fact that Bonifield was based in Atlanta. We did not omit that. We put that in the original video. You're not going to believe what you're about to hear. Or maybe you will. I'd like to introduce you to CNN's supervising producer, John Bonifield, in Atlanta. Paul Farhi begrudgingly was forced to print a retraction, which we put on our wall of shame. Which leads us to the third correction from the Washington Post. This from Phillip Bump, who wrote in his article about our Facebook investigation, quote, "In a statement, Facebook indicated that the so-called whistleblower was a Veritas plant. But she wasn't a plant. She was an insider. She was a person leaking us documents the way that any insider leaks anyone documents." So we reached out to Phillip Bump, who responded to us, and I quote, "I misread the Facebook statement." Really? Did you? In any event, Mr. Bump was forced to correct his statement, and the new article reads, quote, "In a statement, Facebook indicated that the employee was fired in part for working with Project Veritas." Don't you just love how they only change that when you call them out? But that's not the only thing that Phil Bump gets wrong in his article, even though he corrected the part about the person being a Veritas plant. He also says, quote, "There is, however, no evidence of a systemic effort on the part of Facebook to specifically shut down conservative users or content." Well, what more evidence do you need in these documents? You have trolls being defined as having a distinct vocabulary with words like normie, IRL, lulz. You have people like Lauren Chen, mainstream conservative pundits, talking about red-pilling normies. Somehow that her discussion in a YouTube video constitutes troll behavior, because Phil Bump says that the documents, quote, "show that the real focus of Facebook's actions was trolling or other negative behavior." How is people talking in a YouTube video about their philosophies? How are words like normie and mainstream media, how is triggering special features leading up to important elections? How is this troll behavior, Phil Bump? Why aren't you doing your job as a journalist and reporting these facts so people can decide, instead of being a lobbyist and advocate for Facebook? How is that speaking truth to power? Would any evidence be good enough for Mr. Phillip Bump of the Washington Post? What is evidence? What are facts if you refuse to report them when they don't align with your narrative? Or are you only going to stick to the party's narrative? Are you going to be an employee for Facebook, a lobbyist for the investigations you're supposed to be investigating? Are you a newsman or are you an advocate? Well, for all the aforementioned reasons, in addition to the fact that Mr. Bump had to print a correction, which is now we have framed, we are adding Mr. Bump to our legendary wall of shame. Here you go. Beautiful.
Be a catalyst for change. Be brave. Do something.